So in the reading corner today, I'm delighted to be welcoming zoologist and film and radio documentary maker, Justin Anderson. Now, Justin has, amongst his credits, has a Radio 4 documentary about tracking Arctic wolves, and perhaps most famously was responsible for the mountains segment of the Planet Earth 2 series, which involved filming in the high mountains in Pakistan, tracking the elusive, I should say, snow leopard. And of course, that led to a publication of Snow Leopard, Grey Ghost of the Mountain. We're going to be talking about all of this today, and we're also going to be talking about Justin's new book, which is all about the narwhal, the unicorn of the oceans. So welcome, Justin. I am excited to be talking to you. Anything with animals really gets me going.
Oh, that's great. Hi, Nikki. Thanks for having me.
And I want to start, first of all, with your documentary making, because obviously there's a very close connection between that and the children's books. Perhaps we could start with that famous filming of the snow leopard and the mountains. Can you start by just telling us a little bit about that experience and capturing the footage of those very elusive creatures?
Oh, it gives me really happy memories thinking back to that. We were lucky enough to visit Ladakh, which is a region in northern India, across 3 years. We filmed across 3 years, and seeing a snow leopard for the first time was always a highlight for me. They say it's like your soul is singing when you see one. It's quite an indescribable feeling. You just feel incredibly lucky and privileged to see one. But a big part of that journey and that experience was getting to know the local people there over a number of visits, and I'm close friends with them even now. So it's been fantastic for me.
And were the local people very helpful in pointing you in the direction of where you might look?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So we would have no chance of seeing the snow leopards without the knowledge and the input of the local people. Just even like local villagers who telling us where they'd seen them, down to the kind of wildlife guards in the national parks where we worked, who'd actually studied them with camera traps and could give us a pointer of where to kind of look and where to set up. And that's the same for any animal across any documentary that we make. Without that local knowledge or scientific knowledge as well, it's really, really hard to kind of know where to even start.
So what was the first sight like? Can you remember that?
Slightly embarrassingly, I was looking through the binoculars and couldn't see it, and everyone around me was dancing for joy, and I felt slightly like the kind of dull guy in the kitchen at the party. What's going on here? I can't even see this thing. Where is it? Are you sure it's there? And then finally I did see it. I kind of caught up with everyone else, and it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And wow. I did a little jig as well.
I want to explore that word documentary and think about it in relation to story. What is the difference? I mean, how do you define documentary? Because to me, it seems to be about telling stories.
I mean, there's a slight grey area, isn't there, with that word? Documentary for me means the real world, and you can still have stories in the real world, I think, and that's what we try to do with natural history film, but also kind of through the books as well. Is focus on incredible stories that are actually 100% real. And they're the best type of stories to me.
So I'm interested then in the filmmaking and capturing the footage, if you like, if it's still called that. Do you have a story in mind already, or is that going to emerge out of what you actually capture?
Yeah, very much so. We because obviously over the course of a film, you have to have a narrative across the film. So we do look for stories in advance and things that are likely to happen, and we build our shoots around likely behaviours and likely encounters. But saying that, Mother Nature doesn't always play the game, and we do sometimes show up somewhere and everything's completely different this year, or other things happen that we don't expect. An example of that, say, would be Planet Earth 2, where we managed to film an encounter between 4 snow leopards. And I would have been a bit crazy to ever put that into a script before we headed out, because we never would have imagined to get something like that. So sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes you just have to adapt the story to what you see on the ground.
I guess in a way there are some similarities there with writing stories, in as much as there are always surprises no matter what your original plan would have been.
Sure, I think sometimes good things come out of the creative process, don't they? Things that kind of take you by surprise and emerge as the thing unfolds. So you've always got to be open to that, I think.
Let's move on to what came out of, or a kind of byproduct, if you like, Snow Leopard, the first book that you did with Walker. Did they approach you having seen the film, or did you think, I've got to write a children's book about this?
Yeah, it was interesting. So for many years, kind of previous to that, I've been reading Walker's nature story books to my own kids, and I think it was my daughter said to me one night, Dad, you should write one about snow leopards. And I thought, that's not a bad idea, but I'd never done anything like it, and I didn't really know where to start. So I basically wrote an email to Walker saying, I think this is why snow leopards are amazing. I think I gave them 10 reasons why they're the most amazing cats, and why it would make a great book. And a fair while passed, and I think someone finally picked up the email, and they contacted me and said, well, we should start talking about this. And I think originally they were wondering whether I would want to write it or be interested in writing it. They wanted a book on snow leopards, and I was super excited about the prospect of that. So I was very pleased when they were happy to give me a chance, really, to have a go at it.
So you're obviously used to writing, because you do write scripts for the films that you're making.
That's right, yeah. So say for Planet Earth 2, which was narrated by Sir David Attenborough, I would write the script, and there'd be input from, say, him and the executive producer and things, but the producer, which is my role, is mainly responsible for drafting the script. And it's got quite a lot in common, really, with writing books. You think it'd be very different, but on television, the big limiting factor is the time. You have small spaces to fit your words, and they have to be very succinct, and they have to engage people and have an emotional kind of resonance, but also kind of a factual heart to it as well. And that's not unlike writing for children, I think. I think the language is probably a bit different, and you can't get away with as many biological terms for writing for children. You have to simplify things a bit, and there might be a few things that I find fascinating as a zoologist that children will probably think weren't necessarily interesting at all. So there are a few filters that you have to pass through, but there is quite a lot in common, I think, in the discipline of it, I guess.
That's really interesting to hear. Of course, you're right that the terminology, you can't include it all, but one of the things that the nature storybooks that Walker produce allow is for you to have a narrative and then a smaller section of information or exposition. And sometimes the terminology is introduced there. For instance, in the Narwhal book, I was reading the bit where they navigate in the dark, and I'm thinking that's echolocation. And then, of course, it actually says that in the information text. So you do find ways of weaving the key vocabulary in.
Yeah, I love that combination of the two in Walker's nature story books. It's always been a real draw for me. And I think it's like you have that lovely overarching narrative in the big text, but actually if you want to kind of delve into the deeper facts and some of the kind of quirkier facts, which sometimes are quite hard to build into a narrative of a character or an animal, you have a secondary text, in a different font somewhere else on the page. They also have a glossary as well, which is really great, I think, for kids. So if there is any kind of slightly more complex biological terms or references, you kind of have to explain them then in a simpler language.
And then you have to be careful, of course, that the definition is understandable, because sometimes it can be, you get to a glossary and actually the reader's none the wiser after they've read this really opaque definition.
Sure. I think there's a certain amount with biologists as well, a certain amount of assumed knowledge. And, I guess originally I came from a scientific background. And if I go back now to read scientific papers as part of my research for stories and things, it's a struggle sometimes, because that's a world where language is, it's almost like a club that very few people get to access it. It's not written in an accessible way. And it's the opposite, if you like, of writing for children. So it's an interesting juxtaposition of kind of two worlds that we have to kind of cross to kind of, research the facts, but then repackage them in a way that's kind of accessible for younger kids.
I mean, I do want to talk about Narwhal now. Does this also come out of a film, or once you've got into writing for children, did you think that'd be a really interesting creature to write about?
A bit of both, really. I was lucky enough to film Narwhal a while back for a film for BBC One. And they are similarly like the snow leopard, very elusive, very little known about them, hard to research, hard to even see. And I thought, what a great subject for a book. There's also the fact that they seem to be really, really popular in kind of kids' culture at the moment, with little animations and you can get the plush toys everywhere. And I think, though, most people don't really know the first thing about them. So I thought, well, maybe there's a bit of a gap here that I can fill with a story that's 100% factual, and no less wonderful for it. I think that's the thing about them. They're seen as this magical creature, but the magic is real. Really, they're a real mythical beast come to life. So a great subject for a book.
Yeah, I mean, there were things that I discovered that I found quite staggering. Actually, I don't know why I had thought of them as solitary creatures, probably because of popular culture and only ever seeing one at a time. But what really came across in your nature storybook, first of all, about them swimming in pods of around 20, but then getting together, and there's a picture by Joe Weaver, the illustrator, that shows them navigating through a crack in the ice, and there's hundreds of them together. Is that a sight that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that those images in the book, I think Joe's done brilliantly to bring to life. And I was lucky enough to travel to the north of Baffin Island, where the story is set, which is just an incredible landscape of kind of shimmering blue icebergs and sharp precipices and fjords. It's an incredible coastline that the narwhal migrate along. And you get these leads, these cracks in the ice, and we were filming from a helicopter, and I couldn't quite believe it when we started to see narwhal. There was so many of them, and all of them ploughing down these kind of highways through the ice, these leads, and it's I think an amazing perspective from the air that you wouldn't get to see. So we were very lucky in that regard, and that's something that Joe's definitely kind of included in the book, is that kind of the idea of looking down on them and seeing them. It's hard to get out on the ice, you see, because it's breaking up. So it's a dangerous place to be on foot. So seeing them from the air is a really remarkable perspective.
You talked about using a helicopter. Has drone footage made a big difference to your work?
Yeah, increasingly. Yeah, I mean, when I first started, it was helicopters all the way. Which made it difficult and expensive, and sometimes not even possible. But drones have slowly but surely kind of taken over, and they're kind of much easier to afford and better for the environment, which is great.
And presumably not as noisy for the animals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing with the rigs that we had on the helicopters is that they had the most powerful lenses, so we were always a long way off when we filmed, so not to disturb the animals. Drones, I think, can be quieter. I think in the wrong hands, they can be very disturbing. So we're always really careful to work with people who kind of are very mindful of that. But yeah, it's a perspective that kind of it's a new perspective on the natural world. That's really opened doors for our storytelling, I think.
Interesting. Just coming back to Narwhal again, the book has a kind of theme that underpins it, and that's the mystery of the narwhal's tusk. One of the things that I like about great science writing, in this case writing about the natural world, is the acknowledgement that we don't know everything, and there are possible uses for this tusk, which you detail in the book. I wonder if you could tell us about some of them and what people think.
Sure. Well, I mean, the amazing thing to say about the tusk is that it's actually a tooth. It's the most remarkable tooth in the natural world. So it's the upper left canine tooth, which kind of grows through the top of the mouth, and can grow up to 3 meters long, which is like the most extraordinary tooth. It's spiraled as well, so it grows in a very bizarre spiral pattern. And all males have this tusk, but only like 2 in 10 females will have it. So that's led to lots of debate about what we think it's for. Scientists have suggested that it's a weapon for spearing fish, but then how would they get the fish off the end of the spear? Other scientists have discovered that it contains millions of tiny kind of nerves. So it's very, very sensitive and might be sensitive to salt in the water or water pressure, and might be a way that a sensory device, if you like, for the narwhal to either find food in the depths where they live, or to kind of find their way. So there's lots of debate about that. But there's also the fact that if it's for finding food, well, why wouldn't all females need one? So that's the big question there. So that's kind of led to I think the current consensus is that it's almost like a peacock's train. It's an ornament for males to attract females. But then recently, was it a couple of years ago, just to add a bit of something in the mix there, a narwhal was filmed actually using its tusk to stun a fish with a drone, as you were talking about, up in the Arctic. So it may be that this remarkable tooth is actually a bit of a Swiss Army knife, and it could have be mainly for kind of attracting the opposite sex, but probably has lots of other uses as well that we can only just begin to imagine. So it's an incredible thing.
And some of them grow 2 tusks.
Yeah, I think it's 1 in 500 males are what they call a double tusker, and that's amazing. So I think there's creatures out there swimming around that have 2 tusks, and who knows what the mystery is there.
There's also another message that very gently comes through, and that's about obviously the ice melting and their predators, which are the killer whales. Increasingly, they're going to be less able to avoid those predators. I mean, that's one of the possible scenarios.
Yeah, so the narwhal migrate north, and the book follows that story as the ice retreats. But narwhal don't have a dorsal fin, and that's an adaptation, we believe, for them being able to surface with ice above them and come up to the surface and swim very close to the ice. Whereas orca, killer whales, like a male killer whale, can have a 6-foot dorsal fin, as tall as me, and that's obviously a bit of a problem if you've got like an icy ceiling above you. You're always going to be hitting the top. So with the ice disappearing more, they think that's opened up the Arctic for the killer whales to kind of move further north and to follow the narwhal. And there's like more and more reports of that happening, particularly where we were filming in an area called Eclipse Sound at the north of Baffin Island. It seems to be that orcas are being increasingly, regularly encountered, and they're definitely there to feed on the other Arctic whales, the belugas, and the narwhal too.
We've talked about Joe Weaver's illustration, but I'd love to know from you whether there was any particular illustration that we could talk about that had really taken your breath away, or made you think, gosh, that's exactly what it's like, or that really captured a feeling for the place or that animal. Sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think the one I can't stop looking at is the lone narwhal under the ice that finds the hole as seen from below the ice.
So presumably you've not seen from below, or have you?
No. So as part of our filming, we did have a crew on the ice trying to get underwater shots with what we call pole cams, which are cameras on poles that you kind of put over the edge of the ice. Very, very difficult to get shots of narwhal underwater. I think it's only been done a couple of times. So to be able to kind of step back on that scene and see the tiny narwhal and the tiny hole in the ice and really kind of get an idea of visually how that world looks for them was really exciting to me. It's a lovely illustration.
And fantastic use of light coming through the hole in the ice, but you really get a sense of the absolute darkness at the periphery of those images. And it must be incredibly dark down there where they're swimming, which of course is why they use echolocation. Sure,
we think that their eyesight's probably quite poor. So echolocation may be their main way of finding their way around. And in terms of their echolocation, I think it's like 1,000 clicks a second they've been measured at. These rapid bursts, pulses of sound that they make that then bounce back off the icy ceiling and anything hard in the water. And it gives them a mental map of what's before them. So they kind of use sound like a flashlight because their world is so dark to find their way through. Fantastic. It is another really delightful book, and we'll probably be going into our next top 100 that we do fingers crossed
year, I imagine.
That'd be lovely.
I just had a couple of questions to end on, really. Maybe they're a bit obvious, but I am genuinely interested to know the answer. And that is, of all the places that you haven't yet filmed, where do you most want to go?
That's a really good one. I think I've never been to Antarctica, and I'd really love to have the chance to go there. I've had a few projects that it looked like I might be going that way, but didn't quite work out. So that's a big bucket list one for me is to go south and see the ice there and see the penguins and of course all the whales and wildlife that are there too.
And people don't realise it's very different, isn't it, to the Arctic? So there's a lot more land mass, isn't there?
Yeah, well, the Arctic is an ocean, a frozen ocean surrounded by continents. So it's got a ring of land, and the Antarctic's the opposite. It's land surrounded by ocean that freezes. So very, very different. I mean, they have some similarities. I think the Arctic is, I've filmed a lot in the Arctic and spent a lot of time there. It's a very diverse place because there's obviously lots of cultures there, human cultures and communities and things. So that makes it very interesting. So it's more of a jigsaw of a place, I think. Whereas Antarctica is perhaps more the pristine wilderness of our imaginations. And human presence there is kind of limited and kind of temporary, if you like. So yeah, I've always been wanted to go there. Hopefully one day. That's really interesting. It hasn't escaped me that all of the places that we've talked about so far are cold. Yeah, I've got an unfortunate reputation for doing cold things, which part of me is like, maybe if I was at the start of this again, I would have done more kind of tropical beach related kind of filming and become a bit of an expert in Caribbean or somewhere like that. But no, I love cold places. And the Arctic's an incredible place to visit. It's got something that really gets under your skin and into your soul, and it's got kind of a mysticism and a magic to it that it's really, really hard to not want to go back. And very final question. We're off to the Antarctic. Which creature do you most want to see when you get there? It'd have to be the emperor penguin. For me, it's the one animal that has the most dramatic narrative of a life story in terms of the fact that the males overwinter there holding this precious egg on their feet, and the females then undertake this huge journey to bring back the first food for the chick. And it's just such a spectacular story. So yeah, I'd love to see emperor penguins. Well, we hope you get to do the filming, and then what we hope is that we have another children's book after that. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this morning, Justin. Thank you for joining me in the Reading Corner. It's been great. Thanks so much for having me, Nikki.
In the Reading Corner is presented by Nikki Gamble and produced by Alison Hughes. This episode is generously sponsored by Walker Books. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review. If you would like to find out about other events and courses, visit justimagine.co.uk. Join us again in the Reading Corner on your favourite podcast platform.